Probably one of the 5 questions most commonly asked by new players to Factorio is what items should I put on my main bus? We're going to tackle that in this episode. It's definitely already come up multiple times as a question in the series. I want to observe that we want to keep the number as reasonably low as possible. The more items we put on the bus, the more transport belts we're building to shuttle them around, the more resources just sitting there, complications and expense taking the items on and off the bus. If it doesn't need to be there, none of that is good for our factory. We're going to use the recipe book for a bit of reference here. And I want to ask 2 questions of every item we consider putting on the bus. If it can pass both of them, we'll put it on. If it can't pass either, then it's a no. So the questions are, is this needed in scale or volume in multiple locations in the factory? If it's only needed in small amounts, shouldn't go on the bus. If it is only needed in large amounts in one area, then we should build it close to wherever that area is, and then not have it running up and down through our entire main bus in the factory. The other question is compression. That is, does this item take up more or less space in its final product versus the ingredients that are required to make it? If it can take up less space, then that's good to put it on the bus. If it takes up more, then it's simply expanding the bus without a good reason for doing it. So let's take a look at some examples and really unpack this. Iron chest, very obvious, very simple one. The iron chest is not used to produce anything. So there's no reason we should have this on the bus. We should simply say we're going to handcraft this, or maybe we're going to build an assembler somewhere to have some ready for us to use at the most. How about copper cable? This is another one that's often used as an example of something not to put on the bus. But on the production side, it's going to definitely be wanted in multiple locations, even if we only consider not these other ancillary items, but just the electronic circuits and the advanced circuits, which will be in different areas of the factory, and both of them need quite a bit. So, okay, what about the compression side? Well, this is where it fails. 1 copper plate into 2 copper cables. So the copper cable is actually going to take up twice as much space on the bus. You need 2 belts to carry the same amount that you could get from the 1 belt of copper plate. So we should just have the copper plate on the bus and then pull that off and build copper cables in whatever areas that we need them. Now on the other side, probably the clearest example of yes, you absolutely want this on your bus are the green circuits or electronic circuits. They are needed all over the place. Up and down the factory, they are going to be needed in volume. And one of the late game challenges, in fact, in Factorio is how do we get enough electronic circuit production? It scales up very hard at that point. Now, what about compression? Well, 1 iron plate and 3 copper cables, which is 1.5 copper plates, so 2.5 units of raw material for 1 electronic circuit. So another way of looking at that is only 40% of the space is required for electronic circuits, as it would be for the copper and iron plates that ultimately make it up. So on both fronts, absolutely yes, lots of electronic circuits will be needed on the bus. Now some items are not so clear-cut though. Let's consider, for example, pipe. Well, this is needed in not nearly as many items, but it's needed in enough. This is going to be required probably in at least 2 areas, maybe 3, as an item at volume. So we pass the productivity question. Compression, it's dead even. It's not a plus, it's not a minus, it's 1 iron plate to 1 pipe. So should we put it on there? You can argue for it, but I would say no, because it's just simpler to say, I'm just going to take the iron plates off and make them into pipes. Why add another resource on the bus when I'm really not gaining an advantage by doing that? So I'm going to say, do not put your pipes on the bus. And then the one that's probably the most controversial is the iron gear wheel. And I've seen it said on the Reddit, we do not know what weapons World War III will be fought with, but we do know the cause. It will be whether we put iron gear wheels on the bus. It's very contentious. The majority of players, from what I've observed, do not, but there are a significant contingent that do. It definitely is needed in plenty of applications. All of our transport belts, all of our assembling machines, some items later on in the game are going to use the iron gear wheel. So it passes that test of being needed enough quantity in enough different places. Compression? Well, it's 2 to 1. 2 iron plates to 1 gear wheel, so we're cutting the space used on the bus in half. So why do people sometimes not want to put iron gear wheels on the bus. Sometimes it's just a matter of taste, and this is fine if this is your goal, but I'm just trying to approach it from a more analytical perspective in this. If you just want to have more flexibility, if you're using iron gear wheels, then you're probably also going to have to pull off iron in that location anyway, and so you're going to you can simply make them at ratio in that particular area, which is what some very good players like to do. But from my perspective, it just isn't that big of a deal to pull a second item off the bus, and it's worth saving that space and having those gear wheels conveniently available for them as I need them, and not having to add new assembly machines at each individual production line that needs them. So I'm definitely going to say yes, but there are people who say no, and no crime if you're in that category. Putting all of those considerations together, I only have 2 items that I want to build at this point in Common Basics to add to our main bus. Iron gear wheels and electronic circuits. Gear wheels are by far the easier one to handle, so we're going to do that first. We have 2 additional columns then here, and we've extended all of our output lines to the top of where the smelting needs to be for maximum expansion, leaving that room free. But these are both half belts worth 6 furnaces on a side, each of iron, to supply the gear wheels. So on top of this, much like a roof sitting on a house, we're just going to put a little bit of a transition area, but then we'll get our production going. So, say half a dozen on each side, and we will grab some assemblers, output line in the middle, and of course, this is just a very simple setup because we've got 2 iron for each gear wheel, so having 1 input belt on each side and 1 output belt in the middle is going to match exactly. So this one over here just needs to jog over 1 square. But otherwise, all this will work well. We need to ask now, how many assemblers tall do we want this to be? Well, the maximum we can scale up to would be blue belts coming in here and a blue belt coming out here, 45 items a second. The best assembler that we can get will be Assembly Machine 3, 1.25 crafting speed, which means it's going to create a gear wheel every 0.4 seconds. We do the math on that, we're going to have 18 assemblers. So we don't want to guess, we want to have it right. And then 9 of these on each side will provide what we're looking for. And then we just extend our belts. Let's set our recipes here for the assemblers. So gear wheels, and then our shift right click to copy, shift left click to paste. Faster way of telling them all what exactly we need. Let's get some power hooked up. We don't have any directly here in the nearby vicinity, so we'll simply string down temporarily until we expand later our smelting operation. And then we're still going to need, of course, inserters very much like the smelting area, 1 in, 1 out onto the output belt. And onward and upward we go. And I'll do the same thing over here. And so you might call this our first proper production sub-factory, our first proper production line, out of what will of course be a great many. Okay, so let's now set up a reasonable grid of these medium poles. And we'll just keep right on going. Everything is powered. And we'll eventually want faster inserters too, but for the moment, we just want this to be functional. And now it is. So that part's done. Next up, we'll be diving into electronic circuit assembly line when Factorio Demystified returns. Thanks for watching.